Millions of investors are waiting for one single moment, the day OpenAI finally goes public. But here's what's strange. For almost 10 years, OpenAI did everything it could to avoid that exact moment. Why would one of the most valuable companies on Earth refuse the biggest financial milestone in business? A milestone that makes founders rich, makes employees rich, and lets anyone with a brokerage account finally own a piece of the company? That question sits at the center of one of the strangest business stories of the last decade. And by the end of this, you'll understand something that changes how you see every powerful private company around you, not just OpenAI. Let's start with what actually happened. In June 2026, OpenAI quietly filed something called an S-1 with the US government. Think of it as a company's confession booth. It's the document where you finally show regulators your real numbers: revenue, losses, risks, everything. Filing that document is usually the last step before a company goes public. It's the moment everyone assumes is coming. But OpenAI didn't celebrate it. It almost apologized for it. The company said, in plain words, that it hadn't decided on timing, because some things are simply easier to do while staying private. That's a strange thing to say for a company worth close to $1 trillion. So what was OpenAI protecting, and what finally forced its hand? To answer that, we need one quick detour. Because OpenAI didn't invent this behavior, it inherited it. For most of history, owning part of a business meant knowing the owner personally. Then someone invented a stranger idea. Let total strangers buy tiny pieces of a company they've never seen. That idea became the stock market, and it built the modern economy. For 100 years, going public solved two problems perfectly. Early investors finally got paid, and growing companies got access to more cash than they could raise any other way. Grow big, go public. Everybody wins. So when a company becomes one of the fastest growing in tech history, like OpenAI, everyone assumes the same ending. But that assumption broke, and it broke quietly, more than a decade ago. In 2012, the US government made a small legal change that almost nobody noticed. There used to be a rule: get too many shareholders, and the law forces you to open your books to the public. That rule got loosened in 2012. Companies could suddenly grow far bigger and stay private far longer than ever before. Almost overnight, a new kind of company appeared. Investors nicknamed it the unicorn, a private company worth over $1 billion. In 2013, there were about 39 of them on the planet. Today, there are hundreds. Some of the biggest names in business use that freedom to do something almost unthinkable a generation earlier. They simply refused to go public for years, sometimes decades. SpaceX remained private for over 2 decades, becoming one of the most valuable private companies in the world before it ever touched a public exchange. Stripe, the company quietly running payments behind huge parts of the internet, is worth tens of billions of dollars and still has no public stock ticker. Databricks, Epic Games, the studio behind Fortnite. Company after company reaching valuations that would have made front-page news in the 1990s and simply choosing to wait. Why would anyone turn down what every business textbook calls the ultimate finish line? Here's the twist. The finish line moved. But that wasn't the biggest change. The biggest change was still coming. And it happened inside one specific company in one specific year. Private money got so enormous that companies stopped needing the stock market at all. Massive investment funds, some controlled by entire governments, started handing private companies tens of billions of dollars, no stock exchange required. Which means the two oldest reasons to go public quietly disappeared for the biggest players on Earth. Need to cash out early investors? Private buyers can do that now. Need billions in capital? Private investors already have it. The stock market went from being a requirement to being a choice. And that's when OpenAI made a decision almost no company its size had ever made. Go back to 2015. OpenAI wasn't founded as a business. It was founded as a nonprofit. Sam Altman, Elon Musk, Greg Brockman, and a small group of others signed onto a mission that sounded more like a promise than a business plan. Make sure advanced artificial intelligence helps everyone, not just whoever owns the stock. A nonprofit has no shareholders to answer to, no stock price to defend. But there was a problem hiding underneath that idealism. Building advanced AI costs a staggering amount of money, and nonprofits are terrible at raising staggering amounts of money. So in 2019, OpenAI built something strange, a capped profit company living inside the nonprofit. Investors could earn money, but only up to a limit. Past that limit, profits flowed back to the mission, not the shareholders. It was a company built to attract serious investors, made by people who insisted those investors would never fully own it. That single decision explains almost everything that happened next. Then Microsoft showed up. In 2019, Microsoft handed this strange half-nonprofit company $1 billion. At the time, for a company as big as Microsoft, that looked like pocket change. 3 years later, it looked like one of the smartest bets ever made. OpenAI released ChatGPT, and within months it became a genuine global moment, the kind companies wait a lifetime for. Microsoft's stake eventually grew past $13 billion, and its cloud computers became the actual engine running OpenAI's technology behind the scenes. That's when the numbers started sounding almost fictional. Within just 2 years, OpenAI's valuation exploded from tens of billions of dollars to hundreds of billions, to, by early 2026, over $800 billion, raised not from public shareholders, but from a short list of the most powerful private investors on Earth. Names like SoftBank, Amazon, and Nvidia. Read that list again. These aren't hopeful venture capitalists making a gamble. These are some of the largest financial powers on the planet. And they handed one private company in a single sitting more money than the entire AI industry raised in venture funding in any full year before 2024. At that scale, an obvious question shows up. If you can raise that much money privately, what's the stock market even for anymore? But none of this was the real reason OpenAI hesitated. The real reason was hiding somewhere else entirely, inside the company's own bank account. Here's the uncomfortable part almost nobody talks about. OpenAI still isn't profitable. It brings in enormous revenue, but it's also burning through cash faster than almost any company in history, because running advanced AI requires an ocean of expensive computing power. To lock in that computing power, OpenAI signed contracts worth hundreds of billions of dollars with cloud companies like Microsoft and Amazon. Many of these deals work on a pay-it-no-matter-what basis, meaning OpenAI owes the money whether it uses the computing power or not. Now pause and picture something. Imagine being one of OpenAI's early employees. You've watched the company's value climb from a few $1 billion to nearly $1 trillion. Your equity, on paper, could change your entire life. And yet, year after year, you still can't freely sell it, because the company you helped build keeps choosing to stay private. That tension, massive paper wealth locked behind a door nobody will open, is exactly the pressure that started building underneath OpenAI's leadership. Because the gap between what private investors had already given OpenAI and what the company would still need in the years ahead was the real force that finally cracked its resistance to the stock market. Which brings us to June 2026, and the moment everything shifted. For years, Sam Altman deflected every question about going public. Executives talked about acting like a public company, tracking numbers carefully, preparing internally, all while the actual paperwork sat untouched. Then it stopped sitting untouched. OpenAI filed its confidential S-1, and even then, it hedged. The company said it expected the news to leak, so it announced it first, and immediately added that timing was undecided, because some things are simply easier to do while private. Meanwhile, its biggest rival moved faster. Just weeks earlier, Anthropic had overtaken OpenAI entirely, closing a funding round that pushed its own valuation past $900 billion, briefly making it the more valuable of the two companies, and reportedly pushing harder toward a public listing before the end of 2026, which leaves us with the real mystery of this whole story. Why would the company with one of the biggest valuations on Earth, the most cash ever raised privately, and arguably the least urgent need for public money, be the one dragging its feet the longest? The answer isn't one thing. It's four forces, pulling in different directions at once. The first is control. That capped profit structure survived a major reorganization in 2025, which folded the business into something called a public benefit corporation, but with the nonprofit still sitting on top, watching. Going fully public means answering to ordinary shareholders. That's exactly the kind of pressure this structure was built to resist. The second is Sam Altman himself. And one detail that should genuinely surprise you. By public reporting, the CEO of one of the most valuable private companies ever built owns 0% of it. Not a small stake. 0. Most founders push hard for an IPO because that's the day their personal shares finally become real money. Altman doesn't have that personal incentive pulling him toward Wall Street. The third is government scrutiny. Advanced AI now sits under national security attention that no dot-com era company ever had to survive. There have even been early conversations about the US government holding a direct stake in OpenAI, a level of entanglement between Washington and a tech company that simply didn't exist 20 years ago. And the fourth is the coldest force of all. Wall Street hates uncertainty, and OpenAI is full of it. Huge revenue growth next to huge unresolved losses, all riding on a bet that AI keeps growing at a pace nothing in history has ever sustained for long. Public markets punish that kind of uncertainty every single day in the form of a falling stock price. Stay private, and only a small circle of believers gets to judge you. So here's the real question this whole story has been building toward, and it isn't really about OpenAI. Imagine creating one of the most valuable companies on Earth, and still choosing not to ring the opening bell on Wall Street. Not because you can't, because for years you didn't have to. For most of the last century, an IPO was proof you'd made it. But today, for the biggest companies on Earth, the SpaceX, the Stripes, the OpenAIs, staying private has become its own kind of power. It says, we're valuable enough that the old rules simply don't apply to us. We decide when you're allowed in, not the other way around. Wall Street once decided when companies were ready to join it. Today, companies like OpenAI decide when Wall Street is ready for them. That may be the biggest shift in modern business history, and it's happening quietly in a filing almost nobody outside a small circle of lawyers has ever read.